The year is 16-something. In the eyes that matter, you're not a full person. You're controlled property in a warrior's house. Your value is your youth, your sexual availability, your work, and your quiet obedience. The walls are thin. The rules are thick. Most people picture honor, cherry blossoms, and calm samurai. In reality, your life is strict routines, sexual demands, housework, and debt. In this video, I'll explain how Sengoku chaos turned into Edo's cage of rules, using house codes, laws, diaries, and records about pleasure and control. You'll see the hierarchy, the routine, and the punishments without any romantic filter. If you like clear, honest history, please subscribe, leave a like, and comment what topic you'd like next. Take a breath. Let's begin. Before we talk about life inside a samurai house, we need to understand the world outside it. In the late Sengoku period, power was unstable and violent. Castles changed owners quickly. Villages were destroyed. Many homes were basically small military camps with kitchens attached. Capturing people was normal strategy. Taking hostages was a common way to force obedience. These hostages could be family members or young women, and their safety depended on someone else's behavior. When Tokugawa Ieyasu won and the shogunate took control, open warfare slowed. But violence did not disappear. It moved onto paper. Edo peace was built on registrations, permits, and written rules. The battlefield shrank. The office and the magistrate grew. Instead of raiding a rival, you filed a complaint. Instead of grabbing a hostage, you registered a dependent or took in a woman for service. The sword was still important, but the brush decided most outcomes. The book Shohato, the laws for warrior houses, set the tone. Discipline, clear family lines, no private wars, predictable behavior. Domains copied this with their own laws. Together they turned each samurai household into a tiny state. Inside that small state, the lord's will was the main law. Stewards and senior women turned that will into daily schedules and rules. People today love to talk about bushido as if it protected the weak. In reality, in Edo Japan, honor mostly meant following orders, maintaining status, and avoiding public shame. The household was not just a family. It was a machine that used people to protect lineage, income, and reputation. The floors you scrubbed, the tea you served, and the nights you were forced to attend the Lord, all of that was part of the machine. Registration tied every body to an address. Temples, villages, and domains all kept lists. Moving required paper. Marriage required permission. Leaving a job required signatures. This system reduced random killing, but it allowed long-term pressure, neglect, and abuse to continue quietly for years. Inside the gates, everyone watched everyone else. The main wife had the highest rank among the women. Concubines and attendants ranked below her. Their rooms, clothing, and heating all reflected that rank. Access to the Lord was both dangerous and valuable. A small favor might help your family. One mistake could destroy you. Stewards kept ledgers. Senior women enforced manners and schedules. Guards enforced physical control. Gossip acted like another form of policing. A rumor could move you to a worse room or mark you as troublesome. Old Sengoku habits did not disappear. The hostage idea continued, but with softer words. A young woman might be adopted into a house. A daughter might be placed to settle a debt. These words sound kind, but they often meant that her body, labor, and sexuality were handed over to another family in exchange for security or money. Domain laws clearly described marriage, concubinage, inheritance, and dismissal. They were written to protect family lines and status, not individual women. Sons were needed to continue the name. Daughters made alliances. Sexual partners were expected to keep the lord satisfied and the house stable. If a woman caused trouble, vague clauses like improper behavior or excess could be used to punish or remove her. Kindness existed, but it was never free. A better room, a nice robe, or a chance to visit a temple could help you. But these acts were entered in ledgers as favors or gratitude, and they could be used later to demand more obedience. Outside the house, Edo had pleasure districts, like the Kuruwa, where brothels were licensed and controlled. Officials checked health and recorded contracts. Some historians, like Seikohane Hanoshi, argue that these systems were used by the state to control male desire and keep social order. In simple terms, the government created controlled spaces for sex so that men could release frustration without threatening the political system. Your samurai household was a private version of this logic. Everything, including sex, was channeled through rules, ranks, and schedules. The rooms in art prints looked clean and peaceful. Real rooms had dust, smoke, dampness, illness, and bruises that were not discussed. The silence was not peace. It was policy. In Sengoku times, you could die tomorrow in war. In Edo times, you are more likely to be slowly worn down by a life you did not control. You woke up, served, endured sexual demands or the fear of them, obeyed, and tried not to attract the wrong kind of attention. If something went wrong, the punishment could be quietly administrative or openly humiliating. Hold that picture in your mind, the calm surface that hides pressure underneath. Now we can look more closely at what the laws, rules, and routines actually did to someone in your position. The Bukushohato doesn't talk about you directly, but you live inside its shadow. Its main goals are simple: keep samurai families stable, keep warriors obedient, and keep households quiet. To do that, it supports strict family trees, tight discipline, and very clear control over dependents. Local domain codes turn these ideas into specific rules. Marriage was not about love. It was an arrangement approved by superiors. You did not choose a spouse. Your marriage was authorized. Senior wives were officially recognized. Concubines were officially tolerated. This was a system. Multiple sexual partners for the lord were allowed and managed as part of house policy. If you were a concubine or attendant, your body and your sexuality were part of that policy. If you bore a son, your rank might rise, but only within limits. The rules were there to protect the bloodline, not to protect you as an individual. You were always under guardianship. A father, uncle, steward, or senior woman was responsible for your movements and choices on paper. Registers at the village, temple, and domain level listed you as a dependent. If you wanted to visit family, you needed permission. If you wanted to leave service, you needed approvals, and you often needed to settle debts. Vague good order clauses did a lot of harm. The codes used words like harmony, proper behavior, and avoid excess. These sounded positive, but they allowed officials and household superiors to punish almost anything they didn't like. A look that lasted too long, a small gift given or received without permission, or talking to a guard in private could all be treated as improper. Debt and dowry reinforced control. Families negotiated placements for daughters with money, goods, and promises. A girl might be placed in a samurai house for her future, but in reality the family needed debt relief or protection. The house might advance money or clothing. On paper that looked generous. In the ledger it became debt. Leaving meant paying it back. Diaries from women often hide the details behind soft words. Entries like attended in the evening or rest granted show up again and again. In context, attended often meant sexual service to the Lord. Rest might mean a night when she was not required to provide sexual service. Writers protected themselves with vague language, but the pattern is clear when you compare it to schedules and pregnancies. The physical layout of the house and the legal rules work together. Rooms were assigned by rank. Permissions were assigned by status. Law turned into architecture. Who slept near warmth and who slept near drafts? Who was close to the Lord's quarters and who was far away? If you lost favour, you could feel it instantly in your clothing, your heating, and your distance from the centre. Consent in the modern sense did not appear in the laws. Rank did. Etiquette wrapped unequal power in polite rituals. A senior woman delivered the summons. You bowed to her. The steward recorded your attendance. The written record shows compliance, not whether you wanted to be there. Registration made you easy to track and easy to replace. The system always knew where you were. At the same time, your role, a concubine, an attendant, could be filled by someone else. You were both fixed and disposable. Religion appeared mainly in records. Temples recorded births, deaths, and addresses. If a child was acknowledged by the Lord, they went into the family book. If not, they might stay invisible. Fostering, adoption, and removal were all allowed. Rituals such as blessings and memorials could soften the emotional blow, but they did not change the underlying power. Everything came back to good order. That phrase was used to justify almost any control or punishment. It allowed stewards and senior women to extend the reach of written law into every corner of daily life. Your safest path was careful manners, predictable movements, and letters that did not say too much. In short, the law didn't shield you. It defined you as a dependent body whose time, labour, and sexuality were managed by others. Once you understand the hierarchy, the hallways start to make sense. At the top is the primary wife. She controls ceremonies, family rituals, seasonal events, and the public image of the house. Her room is warmer, her bedding is thicker, her servants are better trained. She may not raise her voice, but she can change schedules and access, which directly affect your life. Below her are the concubines, ranked among themselves. A favoured concubine might have a small suite and good heating. Another might be in a cramped room near the kitchen smoke. Their rank determines how close they are to the Lord and how often they are expected to provide sexual service. Senior attendants, usually older women, organise daily routine. They can soften a reprimand or turn a minor mistake into a formal report. The way they look at you, approving or cold, is an early warning system. Stewards hold the ledgers and the keys. They schedule lessons, approve medicine, record sexual attendance, and decide which requests move upward. They answer to the Lord and the primary wife. They rarely touch you physically, but they control a lot of your future. Around them are specialists, midwives, tutors, scribes, and gatekeepers. The midwife tracks pregnancies and births. The tutor judges whether you're refined enough. The scribe copies your letters and sees how steady your hand is. The gatekeeper records who enters and leaves. Each one can protect you, expose you, or ignore you. Access to the Lord is carefully managed. Too much private access can create suspicion and jealousy. Too little can make you invisible and easy to discard. The safest contact is usually in formal settings with other people present. Night summons are different. They combine sexual demand with risk, and there is rarely any real choice. Gossip is part of governance. Comments about who got a new comb, who looks tired, who received a small gift, and who was called for attendance travel up the chain. The information is used to decide punishments, promotions, or quiet warnings. Rotations and inspections keep everyone under observation. Bedding is checked. Clothes are inspected. Hair and nails are examined for neatness. Lessons and tasks are used to see who is obedient, who is clever, and who might be a problem. You answer first to the senior woman assigned to you, then to the steward, then indirectly to the primary wife, and ultimately to the Lord. But in daily life, what you really answer to is the schedule. The schedule decides when you wake, when you serve, when you might be summoned for sexual service, and when you are allowed to rest. Punishment often begins quietly. A colder room, reduced clothing, fewer lessons, or a delayed request. If it escalates, your hair might be cut in a simpler style, your rank reduced, or you might be moved to worse duties. All of this can happen without anyone shouting. The ledger and the room assignments tell the story. Kindness exists, but it is often personal, not structural. A senior attendant might lend you a cloak. A scribe might copy your letter more beautifully. A midwife might stay longer to talk. These small acts can make life more bearable and sometimes protect you. The household is both a mini-state and a stage. Everyone has a role. If you perform your role too well, you may be used more heavily. If you perform it badly, you may be punished or removed. Your best defense is to be competent, cautious, and forgettable at the right times. How did you end up in this house? During Sengoku, many women were taken as war prizes or hostages. In Edo, things looked more orderly, but the basic idea continued through arranged placements. Families, brokers, and samurai houses negotiated like they were trading goods. A family in debt might send a daughter into service. A low-ranking samurai family might offer a niece to a higher house to gain protection or future favors. Words like adoption and service made it sound gentle. In reality, it meant that the woman lost much of her freedom. Her body, labor, and sexuality were now under another family's control. Brokers praised a girl's calm nature, good health, and refined manners. These phrases meant she was likely to obey, survive childbirth, and be safe to place near higher-ranking people. They negotiated her clothing allowances, possible lessons, and how many visits home might be allowed. Once accepted, your first days were training. You learned how to kneel, bow, fold bedding, pour tea, and move quietly. You learned speech patterns that showed respect without attracting attention. You studied the layout of the house and who mattered. You might get lessons in calligraphy, music, or poetry, not to become a star, but to be pleasant and controlled in the rooms you served. Your appearance was also managed. Hair styled in a way that was considered proper, clothing worn according to your rank. Health checks happened early. Older women and sometimes doctors looked for signs of illness, weakness, or anything that might complicate pregnancy or service. These checks were presented as concern for your well-being, but they were really about protecting the house's interests. Paperwork followed. Dowry items, clothing, and any advances were all recorded. Temple registration linked you to this address. On paper, you now belonged here. Leaving would require permission, and usually money. You were given a small room, usually shared or monitored closely, and assigned a senior woman. She became your main guide and gatekeeper. Her opinion could help you or ruin you. From the very beginning, your life was shaped by obligations. You owed your family for placing you here. You owed the broker for arranging it. You owed the house for food, clothing, and shelter, which often turned into debts. You had very little room to say no. Small strategies started early too. You might act a bit clumsy to avoid certain dangerous duties. You might excel at tasks that kept you around older women, rather than alone near the Lord's quarters. You made quiet friendships with scribes, guards, or attendants, trading small favors that could protect you later. On paper, you were adopted or accepted into service. In practice, your life had new owners. Your day started before sunrise. You woke carefully so you wouldn't disturb your hairstyle. You folded bedding, swept tatami, and checked that the room looked calm and clean. Senior women watched not just for dust, but for signs of carelessness or depression. Dressing was a daily reminder of your rank. The number of layers, the quality of cloth, and the way you tied your sash all told others where you stood. Clothing wasn't just fashion. It was a code. Mornings often included lessons, calligraphy, music, or simple reading. They were less about creativity and more about showing discipline and refinement. Then came service blocks, preparing tea, assisting with meals, carrying messages, and being present in the right rooms. You learned who liked their miso stronger, who noticed small mistakes, and who quietly helped or harmed the women beneath them. A lot of your time was spent in controlled waiting. You sat near a screen or a hallway, ready to move when summoned. You couldn't sleep or relax fully. Your job was to be immediately available and visibly calm. Night was divided into segments. Some nights you could sleep through, other nights were broken by summons. When a senior woman came to say you were needed, it usually meant you were being ordered to provide sexual service to the Lord. You had no real choice. Refusal could mean punishment or dismissal with debts. Food followed rank too. Those higher up got better quality and temperature. You might receive small extra treats from someone who liked you, but those gifts could later turn into reasons to demand favors or obedience. Inspections could happen any time. Hair, nails, bedding, and even how you burned charcoal could be judged. Everything you touched became a sign of your character in the eyes of your superiors. Health problems were common. Fatigue from broken sleep, infections from poor hygiene, joint pain from kneeling, and mental stress from constant pressure. Remedies, herbs, moxa, shared recipes, often came from other women, not official doctors. Evening meant resetting your outward appearance. Hair smoothed, sleeves straightened, breath freshened if you could afford cloves or herbs. You watched and listened for footsteps that might bring a summons. The hardest part of the routine was not always the physical work. It was the constant effort to act calm, obedient and emotionally neutral, even when you were anxious or in pain. Now we reach the part the house tried not to name directly. The household used soft words like attendance, night duty, and comfort. Behind these words was one reality. Certain women were required to provide the Lord with sexual access. This was treated as part of your role, not as something you could freely accept or refuse. A senior woman usually delivered the summons. She adjusted your clothing, checked your hair, and made sure you looked proper. This created a ritual frame so that the act could be described later in neutral terms like attendance completed, instead of she was forced to have sex tonight. Consent in a modern sense was not part of the process. Rank replaced consent. If the Lord or the schedule said you were to attend, that was the end of the discussion. Your best choices were around timing and damage control, not yes or no. Manners hid the reality. You were expected to walk calmly, bow, and stay quiet. The steward recorded the time, and sometimes the result if pregnancy was suspected later. The primary wife might know about these visits, but they were treated as part of her role in managing the household, not as a betrayal in the romantic sense we think of today. You developed survival tactics within this limited space. Sometimes you could delay a summons by being unwell. A midwife or senior woman might support this if they believed it would protect the house in the long run. For example, if you were already pregnant or physically exhausted. But these tactics had to be used carefully. Overuse could mark you as disobedient. Pregnancy had its own logic. A pregnancy at a good time could raise your status. A pregnancy at a bad time could cause anger, stress, or pressure to hide or end it. The house cared about timing, legitimacy, and appearances more than your well-being. You leaned heavily on alliances. Other attendants, the midwife, and even some guards could help. A guard might cough at a certain moment to warn you someone was coming. A midwife might argue that you needed more rest for health reasons. A senior woman might quietly delay a summons if she felt the Lord was acting dangerously. Health costs built up. Broken sleep, repeated unwanted sexual contact, and stress affected your body. Pain and illnesses were often recorded in diaries as fatigue or weakness, but the context shows that sexual demand was a major factor. Gifts after sexual service, silk, combs, small purses, were another kind of control. On the surface, they looked like rewards. In ledgers, they often became debts or proof of favour, which could later be used to keep you compliant. You were favoured, you were given gifts, now you must be grateful. Some encounters were emotionally calmer than others. A lord might talk about hunting, weather, or politics before or after. You learned how to guide conversation towards safe topics and away from mood swings. The goal was to get through the night without triggering anger or jealousy. The official language pretended that all of this was normal duty. You survived by understanding that whenever the house said attendance, it meant you were being ordered into sexual activity under unequal power, recorded in a way that erased your lack of choice. Pregnancy changed everything, but it did not necessarily free you. When a midwife confirmed a pregnancy, it instantly became a house matter, not just your own. A potential son meant a future heir, or an important branch of the family. A daughter meant a future marriage alliance. Either way, your body was now carrying something the house considered valuable. You were often told to rest more and move less. Your diet changed. You might be moved to a better, or, in some cases, more isolated room. Rituals and charms were used alongside basic medical care. Some of this did help, but it also reinforced the idea that your main value was now your womb. If you were already in favour, pregnancy could increase your comfort. More heating, better clothing, gentler treatment. If your position was fragile, pregnancy could increase tension with the primary wife or other women. They had to publicly support the child's survival while privately protecting their own status. Birth was dangerous. Midwives did what they could with the knowledge and tools they had, but infection and uncontrolled bleeding were common. Men usually stayed away from the birth room. They heard news through reports. If a son was born and acknowledged, your rank usually rose. Your room might move closer to warmth and away from the worst tasks. You might gain more say in small matters, but you were still under the authority of the house. Your new safety depended on the child's survival and recognition. If a daughter was born, there were still rituals and small celebrations, but her value was often viewed in terms of future marriages and alliances. Again, you were treated a little better, but within limits. If the child died or was born weak, diaries and records often used brief phrases like, "the child did not live." The emotional weight was smoothed over with ritual. The house moved on quickly because its main concern was stability. Sometimes children were fostered or sent to be raised elsewhere. You might hand your baby to another woman who would raise them in a different house or part of the house. The reasons were usually political or practical. More tutors, better status, or convenience. Your feelings were rarely part of the decision. Tension with the primary wife and other women was managed with strict etiquette. Publicly, everyone showed respect. Privately, they watched each other carefully. You had to balance gratitude, caution, and self-protection. Childbirth also put your own life at risk. Many women died from complications. Even if you survived, your health might be permanently damaged. But the house focused on the lineage. If a healthy heir existed, the system considered that a success. In simple terms, pregnancy and birth could improve your conditions briefly, but they tied you even more tightly to the household and its politics. Punishment in a samurai house was often quiet and layered rather than blatantly violent, but it could still ruin you. It often began with small changes: a cooler room, delayed clothing, fewer small privileges. You might suddenly find yourself with the older, worn bedding or less fuel for heating. These shifts signaled that you had displeased someone. The next level was relocation. You could be moved to a less desirable room under an innocent excuse. Fewer people passed by. Fewer eyes saw how you were doing. Your world shrank. A very clear form of shame was changing your hairstyle or clothing in a way that marked lower status. Everyone in the house understood what it meant. It told others you had done something wrong, even if no one said it directly. Dismissal was the harshest ordinary punishment. On paper, you were returned to your family. In practice, this meant facing debts, shame, and fewer options. The house could demand repayment for clothes, medicine, and past gifts. If your family was poor, this was a serious blow. There were even more severe outcomes: long-term isolation in a back room, forced retirement to a temple, or simply disappearing from the records. The language used was soft: recuperation, piety, or transfer. But the effect was often permanent removal. What counted as an offence was flexible. Improper familiarity could mean anything from talking too freely to being suspected of a secret relationship. Excess could refer to clothing, speech, or behaviour. The vagueness allowed punishment whenever it was convenient politically or socially. Punishments often affected more than one person. If you failed, your supervising senior woman might also be blamed. The guard on duty might be punished. The message was that everyone had a reason to keep you obedient. When you were in trouble, inspections became more intense. Your belongings were checked more often. Small mistakes were noted. The aim was to push you back into strict compliance, or to build a case for harsher punishment. Most of this never showed up as abuse in official records. It showed as changes in allowances, room assignments, and notes like transfer or rest. Because formal ruin was so serious and expensive, many houses preferred correction over destruction. If someone wanted to keep you, they could arrange apologies, temple visits, and gift exchanges that acted as formal reconciliation. But if the house wanted you gone, paperwork did the work. A few seals and signatures could close off your access to travel, work, or support. You survived by practicing preventative discipline, flawless manners, carefully neutral letters home, and steady alliances with people who could speak for you if needed. Your life in the house was wrapped in an economy of control. You received a basic stipend, food, clothing, and sometimes a tiny amount of money. But all of it was tied to your obedience and rank. Rice, miso, and charcoal were rationed. Clothing was issued by season and recorded. Clothing was both necessity and symbol. The quality, thickness, and colour of your garments told everyone your place. When domain codes said appropriate clothing will be provided by rank, it meant that the house used clothes to keep hierarchy visible at all times. Gifts moved constantly: combs, silk, small boxes, sweets. They travelled up and down the hierarchy. You might receive a comb after a good night of sexual service, or you might offer a small gift to a superior to smooth things over. These gifts were often written into ledgers as gratitude, which turned them into another tool of control and debt. Your family's initial dowry still affected you long after you entered the house. A generous dowry could give you slightly more protection. A small one left you more vulnerable. Debts were everywhere. Extra clothing, medicine, special food, or help with a temple donation all showed up as amounts you owed. You often never saw this accounting directly, but it was there on the steward's desk. One of the most effective tools was the advance. If the house advanced you a winter robe, that kindness could later be used to block a request to visit family. Your exit or your rest could be denied until debts were balanced. Brokers and go-betweens also took a share over time. They might return to check on you and collect small payments or favors from the house. Their business depended on maintaining the system of placements. Temple donations acted as another form of record. A donation made for your health or for harmony in the household might be required before a break or absence was accepted. The stamp from the temple served as proof that everything was done properly. Leaving cleanly was very hard. You needed money, favorable written statements, and someone willing to sign off on your service as satisfactory. Without that, many doors in society stayed closed. On the surface, allowances and gifts looked like care. In practice, they kept you in place. You learned to manage small amounts of money and favor like someone managing weather. Never fully in control, always adjusting. Outside the samurai house, Edo had an entire separate system for managing sex and desire. The licensed pleasure districts like the kuruwa. These districts were surrounded by walls and gates. Inside were brothels with regulated courtelans. The government licensed them, recorded their contracts, and often required regular health checks. Officials said this was to maintain public order and cleanliness. In reality, the kuruwa and the samurai household shared similar logic. Both controlled women's bodies and sexuality through contracts and rules. Both used ledgers and schedules to organize sexual access. Both turned men's desires into something taxed, managed, and contained. The main difference was that in the kuruwa, the system was public and commercial. In samurai houses, it was private and wrapped in family language. Courtesans in the kuruwa were trained in music, conversation, and charm. They signed contracts that often came with large debts for clothing, training, and housing. Their refusal power was limited by those debts and by the brothel's need to make money. The samurai household did not sell sex openly, but it controlled sexual access in a similar way through rank and duty. Hanashi and others argue that the state used these leisure systems as safety valves. Men could release tension in controlled spaces, which reduced the chance of rebellion or public scandal. It kept the larger system running. This continuity matters. It shows that what happened to you inside the house was not just personal misfortune. It was part of a wider network of rules and markets that organize sexuality in the service of social order. It is easy to think that once the war stopped, violence stopped. But that isn't true. It changed form. In Sengoku, violence was open, raiding, burning, killing, taking captives. In Edo, violence became administrative. It moved into rules, registrations, and schedules. Instead of being taken at sword point, you were placed by agreement and sealed with paper. Instead of a commander shouting, a steward quietly changed your schedule. Instead of chains, you had debts and guardianship. This kind of violence is harder to see. It does not always leave bruises, but it limits your choices, controls your body, and can destroy your life. Surveillance was constant. Gatekeepers watched who came and went, stewards watched your requests, senior women watched your behavior. Information flowed upward as reports and complaints. Punishments used paperwork instead of weapons. A change in your registration could block your travel. A negative note in the records could ruin future placements. A quiet dismissal could send you back to poverty. The state, the domain, and the household all shared this style. They spoke the language of order, harmony, and public good, but they used it to justify strict control over people like you. Within this system, you had limited ways to fight back, but you still had some strategies. The most important was building alliances with other women. Older attendants, midwives, and even kitchen workers could protect you by speaking well of you, warning you about danger, or helping you negotiate small changes. Rituals like temple visits gave you rare moments of partial relief. A stamped temple visit could justify a short absence. It also created a record that might protect you if someone questioned where you were. You practiced discretion constantly. You avoided saying anything that could be repeated against you. You kept your face calm. You tried to be easy to manage so that superiors saw you as low risk. You wrote letters to family that hid real problems under safe language about weather and health. If they understood your codes, they might send a little help or time visits carefully. You also created private anchors, a poem you remembered, a small object hidden in your clothing, or a moment with a trusted friend. These small things helped you feel like a person in a system that treated you as a role. None of these strategies gave you full freedom, but they could reduce harm and help you survive. Modern images often mix geisha, courtesans, and household women into one romantic picture. That picture is false. Geisha were mainly entertainers. Courtesans in the Kurua sold contracted sexual services. Household women like you were controlled dependents whose sexuality was managed as part of family and political strategy. Samurai romance stories and modern media often show noble warriors and willing women in clean rooms with soft light. They rarely show the ledgers, the debts, the forced sexual access, or the fear of punishment. Honor and bushido are presented as protective. In practice, they mostly protected the house's reputation and hierarchy. Many people today still prefer the beautiful version: silk, lanterns, music, and quiet. It is easier to look at. But underneath that surface were rules that turned women's time, labor, and sexuality into tools for maintaining power. When the Meiji Restoration came and the samurai class began to lose legal status, the patterns did not disappear. They moved. New civil laws created modern households, but many of the old ideas remained. Male heads of families, registered dependents, controlled marriages, and strict gender roles. Licensed brothels continued under new names. Later they were shut down on paper and replaced with other service industries. The language changed. The basic structure stayed: controlled contracts, debt, male demand, and female labor. Factories and boarding houses reused the idea of dormitories, guardians, and strict schedules. Young women left home to work in spinning mills, textile factories, or later entertainment industries, often under contracts and living conditions that limited their freedom. Historians like Hanochi link Edo's systems to later ones, including military comfort stations and modern sex industries. The details differ, but the logic is similar. The state and businesses organize sexual labor and emotional service to support broader economic and political goals. Understanding the Edo samurai house helps us see that these are not isolated stories. They are part of a longer history of controlling women's bodies and sexuality in the name of order, to bring it back to you in one life. You woke up with a stiff neck from carefully preserved hair. You smelled smoke, sweat, and faint incense. You felt cold rush over your hands as you washed. You wrapped yourself in layers you did not choose. You knelt on tatami that scratched your knees and pulled at old bruises. You moved through narrow corridors, always aware of who might be behind the next screen. You listened for your name and for the knocks that meant work, service, or sexual summons. You learn to read the air, a slightly colder tone from a senior woman, a delayed bowl of rice, a missing small kindness. Each sign told you how safe or unsafe you were that day. You tried to save tiny bits of comfort, a slightly warmer corner, a shared joke, a short moment alone at a shrine. You held on to those because so much else was out of your control. Everything I've described here comes from a mix of sources: laws, domain codes, house rules, diaries, ledgers, temple records, and modern historical studies. The laws show the ideal structure. Diaries and ledgers show how that structure felt in daily life. Diaries hide sensitive details under vague words. Ledgers reduce lives to rice, cloth, and fees. Both need careful reading. When women wrote attendance, rest, or fatigue, they were often talking about sexual demands and the strain they caused, but they could not say it directly without risk. That's why we must read those words with context and caution. I've tried to use clear, direct language here. Forced sexual service, sexual access controlled by rank, administrative punishment, without being graphic. The goal is to be honest about what happened, not to sensationalize it. If you remember one line from all of this, let it be this. Beneath the silken ceremony, the system turned people, especially dependent women, into schedules, debts, and controlled obedience, and then called the result order and harmony. If this helped you see past the romantic images and understand the reality more clearly, please subscribe, like the video, and let me know in the comments which world or period you'd like me to unpack next. No recap, just know this. Behind every calm painting of a samurai house, someone's sleep was not their own.